The click of the lock was the sound of her world ending. 24 hours. A countdown that had felt like an eternity and a blink of an eye all at once. Now it was over. Isabella Sterling stood on the cold pavement of Ethelberg City's most exclusive street, a ghost haunting the entrance to a life that was no longer hers. The marble facade of the penthouse loomed above, indifferent and mocking. Inside were the remnants of her marriage, the shards of her heart, and a positive pregnancy test she never got to share. Out here, there were wolves. The first flashbulb was blinding, a searing white that bleached the world. Then another and another. A rapid staccato of clicks and whirs, the sound of the paparazzi closing in. They swarmed her, a pack of hyenas sensing a fresh kill. Voices shouted her name, questions like poisoned darts. Isabella, is it true? Did Julian leave you for Serafina? Are you really pregnant? Each word was a physical blow, and she staggered back, a hand flying instinctively to her stomach. She was a statue in a hurricane, frozen, exposed, with nowhere to run. The life she had built, the man she had loved, it had all been a gilded cage, and now that the door was thrown open, she found herself not free but tossed into the arena. Just as the claustrophobia began to crush her, a sleek black sedan sliced through the chaos, its engine a low, menacing purr that parted the sea of bodies. It pulled up beside her, an obsidian fortress against the storm. The tinted rear window glided down with a whisper. "Izzy?" The voice cut through the noise, a lifeline. Isabella looked up, her vision blurred with unshed tears, and saw the worried face of her best friend, Chloe Vance. Relief, so potent it almost brought her to her knees, washed over her. Chloe's door swung open in a silent invitation. Isabella didn't hesitate. She scrambled inside, and the door slammed shut, cutting off the cacophony of the world. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the frenzied photographers in its wake. Inside the car, silence reigned. Chloe didn't ask questions. She simply wrapped a cashmere blanket around Isabella's trembling shoulders and handed her a bottle of water. They drove through the city's glittering canyons, each skyscraper a monument to a world that had spat her out. Chloe's apartment was a sanctuary of warm woods, soft fabrics, and the scent of white tea, a world away from the cold, impersonal grandeur of the penthouse. It was a place to breathe. For an hour, Isabella just sat, the shock rendering her mute. Chloe moved around her, a silent, comforting presence, making tea, dimming the lights. Finally, Isabella's voice returned, a raw whisper. "He knew, Chloe. He knew I was pregnant, and he didn't care." Chloe's expression, usually so bright and effervescent, hardened into something fierce. "Of course he didn't. Men like Julian Croft don't have hearts, Izzy. They have assets and liabilities. You just got reclassified." She knelt in front of her friend, taking her hands. "So, we're not gonna cry. We're gonna fight. I'm calling Eleanor." Isabella flinched. Eleanor Vance. Chloe's older sister wasn't just a lawyer. She was a legend in Ethelberg's brutal divorce courts. A woman known for dismantling dynasties with a cool smile and a meticulously prepared lawsuit. She was brilliant, expensive, and terrifying. "I can't afford her, Chloe," Isabella whispered, the grim reality of her situation setting in. She had nothing. Julian had made sure of that. "Don't you worry about that," Chloe said, already dialing. "Consider it a family investment." The phone was answered on the first ring. Chloe put it on speaker, and a voice as crisp and sharp as shattered glass filled the room. "Chloe, tell me you have good news." "It's not Chloe, Eleanor. It's Isabella Sterling." There was a pause on the other end, a beat of silence that felt like a strategic calculation. Then Eleanor Vance spoke, and there was not a trace of pity in her voice. Only the cold, thrilling hum of a predator scenting blood. "Good," Eleanor said. The word was a weapon. "Let him think you're broken. Let the tabloids paint you as the tragic victim. Let him and his little designer toy think they've won. We're going to make him pay so dearly he'll wish he'd been born a peasant." The sheer force of her confidence was a jolt to Isabella's system. "But he has everything. The best lawyers, the best PR. He has arrogance," Eleanor cut in. "And arrogance leaves blind spots. I've been watching Julian Croft for years, waiting for an opening. He's insulated but not invincible. There have always been whispers, a ghost story on the trading floors, something called Project Nightingale." "Project Nightingale?" Chloe asked, leaning closer. "What is it?" "It's a vulnerability." Eleanor's voice was low, conspiratorial. A structural weakness buried so deep in Croft Holdings' foundations that Julian thinks no one knows how to detonate it. A failsafe from his early days, a deal with the devil he probably forgot he made. But I haven't. A rustle of papers could be heard. I need to make a call to an old friend, someone who knows where the wires are. In the meantime, Isabella, your job is to rest, and to get angry. Grief is a fog. Anger is a fire. I need you to be a wildfire. The days that followed were a blur of legal consultations and crushing media coverage. Eleanor's strategy was clear: build a fortress of evidence while the world was distracted by the melodrama. The paparazzi photos were relentless. Julian and Serafina in Paris, laughing outside a five-star hotel. Julian and Serafina on a yacht off the coast of Monaco, her draped over him like a trophy. The images were designed to humiliate, to grind Isabella into dust. One afternoon, Chloe slid a tablet across the coffee table, her face grim. "More from Paris," she said softly. Isabella steeled herself. It was another picture of them, stepping out of a limousine. Serafina was wearing a ridiculously expensive-looking coat, and Julian had a proprietary arm around her. The familiar pang of betrayal hit her, sharp and hot. She was about to look away, to give in to the tears that always threatened, when something caught her eye. It wasn't them. It was the folder Julian was holding, a sleek leather-bound portfolio, and on its corner, a small embossed logo. Her mind, once foggy with grief, suddenly sharpened into crystalline focus. She knew that logo. It belonged to Atelier Moreau, a boutique architectural firm specializing in ultra-luxury retail spaces. A firm Julian had once considered acquiring for Croft Holdings but had publicly passed on, calling it overvalued. So why was he carrying their portfolio now? Her heart began to hammer, not with pain, but with a new, electrifying sensation. "Hope. Chloe, zoom in," she commanded, her voice firm. Chloe, startled by her friend's sudden change in demeanor, did as she was told. The logo came into sharp relief. "Eleanor," Isabella shouted, grabbing her own phone. "Get Eleanor on the line now." When the lawyer answered, Isabella didn't wait for pleasantries. "It's the photos, Eleanor, the ones from Paris." He's holding a folder from Atelier Moreau. "The architects? So what? Don't you see?" Isabella was pacing now, the energy surging through her. Croft Holdings doesn't work with them. He publicly dismissed them. But Serafina's new flagship store, the one that's supposed to launch her brand into the stratosphere. The location was a secret, but it's in the most expensive district in Paris. What if he's using corporate assets, off the books, to fund it? What if he's funneling money through a shell acquisition of that architectural firm to build her a palace? Silence on the other end of the line. It was a different kind of silence this time. A silence filled with awe. "My God," Eleanor breathed. "Project Nightingale isn't a failsafe. It's a pattern of behavior. You just found us the first thread, Isabella. You found us the evidence we need to unravel him." Her voice was filled with a new respect. "Stay put. I'm filing for a full financial disclosure. He's going to fight it, but now we have cause." Isabella hung up, her hands shaking, but not from weakness. It was the first time since the world had collapsed that she felt a sliver of power. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a player. She was a threat. Just as the adrenaline began to settle, Eleanor's phone, still on the coffee table and connected to the speaker, rang. It was an unlisted number. Chloe and Isabella exchanged a look. Eleanor had told them she was waiting for a callback from her old friend. Chloe tentatively tapped the screen. "Hello? Eleanor Vance's line." A voice answered, and it sent a chill down Isabella's spine. It was a man's voice, deep and impossibly smooth, like velvet wrapped around steel. It held an unnerving calm, the sound of immense power held perfectly in check. "Eleanor, I hear you're looking for a way to dismantle Julian Croft." The voice paused, letting the statement hang in the air like a guillotine. "You've come to the right place. My name is Damien Thorne." The name hung in the air. A promise of either salvation or a different kind of damnation. Damien Thorne. The silence in Chloe's apartment was absolute, broken only by the hum of the city outside. Isabella stared at the phone on the coffee table as if it were a venomous snake. She knew the name, of course. Every player in Ethelberg's stratosphere knew of Damien Thorne. He was the shadow to Julian's blinding light, a self-made titan of venture capital and tech who had risen from obscurity with terrifying speed. His rivalry with Julian Croft wasn't just business. It was the stuff of corporate legend, a bitter, personal war waged in boardrooms and on trading floors. And he wanted to help her. "Hang up," Isabella whispered, her voice trembling. "Chloe, hang up now." "Are you insane?" Chloe shot back, her eyes wide. "This is a gift from the gods of vengeance." Before Isabella could protest further, Eleanor's sharp voice cut through the speaker. "Mr. Thorne, how timely. I was just about to have my office reach out to yours." There was no surprise in her tone, only the cool efficiency of a general seizing an opportunity. "My client and I would be open to a preliminary discussion. Discretion, of course, is paramount." "But of course, Eleanor," the velvet voice replied. "Discretion is the art of power. The Onyx Room at the Umbra Hotel, tomorrow, 4 p.m., just the three of us." The line went dead. The meeting was set. Isabella felt a nauseating mix of fear and exhilaration. She was stepping out of a war with a king only to contemplate an alliance with his deadliest rival. Was she trading one monster for another? The Onyx Room was not a bar, it was a confession booth for the powerful. Tucked away in the city's most discreet hotel, it was a space of dark wood, worn leather, and hushed silence, where the only light seemed to emanate from the amber glow of century-old whiskeys. There were no windows, no distractions. It was a place designed for secrets. He was already there, seated in a high-backed leather armchair, a glass of something dark resting untouched beside him. Damien Thorne was not what she expected. The tabloids painted him as a ruthless brute, a corporate raider. But the man before her was possessed of a dangerous stillness. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair impeccably styled. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were a deep, knowing gray, missing nothing, assessing everything. He looked less like a brute and more like a grandmaster of chess, patiently watching his opponent blunder into a trap he'd set 10 moves ago. He rose as they entered, his movements fluid and precise. "Miss Vance," he nodded to Eleanor, "and Mrs. Croft." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please." Isabella sat, her posture rigid. She felt like a pawn in a game whose rules she didn't understand. Damien let the silence stretch, a subtle exertion of control. Then he leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Isabella. His voice was low, intimate, cutting through all pretense. "So, Mrs. Croft," he began, "let's dispense with the pleasantries. I have a question for you, and your answer will determine whether this conversation continues. What do you want more, justice or revenge?" The question was a blade, sharp and direct. Isabella's first instinct was to say justice, the noble, righteous answer. But looking into his unblinking eyes, she knew a lie would be pointless. The raw, burning anger that had been simmering beneath her grief answered for her. "I want him to feel what I felt," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but laced with steel. "I want him to watch everything he built, everything he values, turn to ash, just like he did to me." A slow, appreciative smile touched Damien's lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "Good, honesty. Revenge is simply justice with emotion, and emotion is a powerful motivator." He settled back in his chair. "Then we have a basis for an alliance." "An alliance requires shared interests, Mr. Thorne," Eleanor interjected, ever the lawyer. "What's in this for you beyond the schadenfreude of seeing your rival fall?" Damien's gaze shifted to the untouched glass beside him. 15 years ago, Julian Croft and I were junior associates at the same firm. We worked under a man named Marcus Vance. No relation, Eleanor, just a coincidence of a good name. Marcus was my mentor. He was a brilliant, honorable man who built a boutique investment house from the ground up. He trusted Julian. He brought him into his inner circle. He paused, swirling the dark liquid in his glass. Julian repaid that trust by stealing Marcus's proprietary algorithm, tweaking it just enough to call it his own, and using it to launch what would become the cornerstone of Croft Holdings. He leveraged that stolen tech to execute a hostile takeover of Marcus's own firm. It ruined him, utterly. Marcus lost everything. He died of a heart attack 6 months later. The world called it stress. I called it murder. The story hung in the air, thick and heavy. This wasn't just business. This was a vendetta. "Julian thinks the past is buried," Damien continued, his voice now dangerously soft. "But I don't forget. For 15 years I have been building my own empire, waiting for the right moment, the right leverage to settle that debt. The problem is Julian is insulated. He's careful. But now he's made a mistake. A very public, very emotional mistake. You, Mrs. Croft, you are the leverage I've been waiting for. He reached into his suit jacket and produced a small velvet box. He slid it across the polished table toward Isabella. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black satin, was not a piece of jewelry, but a tie clip. It was a stark minimalist piece, crafted from a single polished slab of what looked like black volcanic glass. Obsidian. It's a USB drive, Damien explained. Julian's lawyers will bury us in paperwork. They will delay, they will file motions, they will exhaust your resources. This is how we fight back. Not with money, but with information. Evidence. He tapped the box. On that drive is a preliminary file, a record of every unofficial wire transfer, every hidden payment, from a dozen Croft Holdings subsidiary accounts to a network of shell corporations owned by one Serafina Dubois. It's the beginning of the thread you pointed out to Eleanor, the one that, if we pull it, will unravel his entire tapestry of lies. Isabella stared at the obsidian clip. It felt heavy, impossibly so. Why are you giving this to me? Because a lawsuit from me is just business, Damien said. A lawsuit from his pregnant, discarded wife, armed with irrefutable evidence of his financial infidelity? That's a character assassination. It will spook his board, rattle his investors. It's a wound that will fester. He leaned in again, his voice dropping. Be careful with it. Obsidian is volcanic glass. It's beautiful and sharp, but it's brittle. It's formed under immense heat and pressure. A reminder, he added, a flicker of something dark in his eyes, that the most beautiful things can be shattered, and that the darkest stones often hold the most pressure. The weeks that followed were a brutal education in corporate warfare. Just as Damien predicted, Julian's legal team came out swinging. They filed motion after motion, attempting to bury Eleanor in a blizzard of paperwork. Their official strategy, however, was far more insidious. They began to build a case that Isabella was mentally unstable, emotionally erratic, and unfit to be a mother. They subpoenaed her therapy records, they deposed her friends, twisting every tear, every moment of grief into a sign of psychological fragility. It was a vicious, humiliating campaign designed to break her spirit and discredit her before the lawsuit could even gain traction. Isabella felt the pressure mounting, the doubt creeping in. But every time she felt herself start to fray, she would hold the cold, smooth obsidian tie clip in her hand. A reminder of the fire and pressure she was under. A reminder that she was not alone in this fight. The breaking point came during the deposition. It was held in a sterile, soulless conference room on the 40th floor of a glass tower. Isabella sat at one side of a massive mahogany table, with Eleanor and Chloe beside her. Across from them sat Julian, flanked by a team of 3 smirking, pinstriped lawyers. He looked bored, arrogant, utterly confident. He wouldn't even meet her gaze, treating her as nothing more than a nuisance. For hours, Julian's lead attorney grilled her, his questions dripping with condescension. He brought up her grief, her anger, her calls to Chloe, painting a picture of a hysterical, vengeful woman. Then, it was Eleanor's turn. She was calm, almost serene. She didn't raise her voice. She simply adjusted her glasses, consulted her notes, and began. She asked a series of dry technical questions about corporate governance and subsidiary accounts, lulling Julian's team into a state of boredom. And then she struck. "Mr. Croft," she said, her tone deceptively casual, "could you please explain the purpose of the Nightingale Fund, an entity registered in the Cayman Islands, account number 74BA38C?" The effect was instantaneous. One of Julian's lawyers fumbled his pen. The lead attorney's smirk vanished. And Julian froze. His head snapped up, and for the first time that day, he looked directly at Isabella. The boredom was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that remained in his cold gray eyes was a flash of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the look a king gives the assassin who has just slipped past his guards. He knew. In that moment, he knew she had found something real. He knew she had the evidence. The mask had slipped. It was only for a second, but everyone in the room saw it. The first crack in the empire of Julian Croft. That night, Isabella felt a grim, weary satisfaction. They had drawn blood. A courier arrived at Chloe's apartment late in the evening. He delivered a single, heavy envelope addressed to Isabella. Inside, there was no letter, only a thick black card of impossibly high quality. Engraved in shimmering silver calligraphy were the words, the Eclipse Gala. Tucked behind it was a small, crisp note, written in the same decisive hand as the courier's label. The message was short, a command and a promise all in one. It's time for the Queen to re-enter the board. He will be there, and he won't be expecting you. The invitation was not just paper, it was a declaration of war. For a day, Isabella held the heavy black cardstock in her hands, tracing the silver calligraphy of the Eclipse Gala. Was she ready for this? Was she ready to step back into the world that had so eagerly consumed her, to face the man who had shattered her life and the woman who had helped him? The fear was a cold knot in her stomach. But beneath it, the fire Eleanor had spoken of was beginning to burn. Hiding was what he expected. Hiding was what the old Isabella would have done. She made her choice. She would not hide. She would burn his world to the ground. The grand ballroom of the Ethelberg Astoria was a galaxy of shimmering light and whispered power. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of 1,000 conversations, each one a potential alliance or a death sentence. This was the apex of the city's social calendar, the annual Eclipse Gala hosted by the enigmatic Damien Thorne. And tonight, it was a battlefield. When the grand oak doors swung open, a hush fell over the room. It started near the entrance and spread like a ripple in a pond, a wave of silence that commanded every eye. Isabella Sterling entered on the arm of Damien Thorne. She was not the weeping, broken woman from the tabloids. She was a vision. A custom-made sapphire gown flowed over her body, the deep, brilliant blue, a stark contrast to the room's golden light. The fabric was masterfully tailored, clinging to her curves before draping elegantly over the gentle, unmistakable swell of her pregnancy. A simple diamond necklace glittered at her throat, but her true jewels were the cold, unwavering confidence in her eyes and the defiant set of her jaw. She was not a victim seeking pity. She was a rival's power move made manifest, a queen returning to the board to claim her stake. Damien, a formidable presence in a flawless black tuxedo, guided her through the room with practiced ease. He was the center of this universe, and his gravity pulled her along with him. The whispers followed them, a sibilant, invisible trail. Is that her? My God, she's glowing. With him? This is a scandal. Isabella heard it all. She felt the weight of their gazes, pity from some, contempt from others, and a rapacious curiosity from everyone. But she didn't flinch. She let Damien make the introductions, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a picture of poise and strength. He introduced her not as a victim, but as a respected associate, a strategic partner in a new philanthropic venture. It was a masterstroke, reframing her narrative from personal tragedy to professional power. For the first time in months, people weren't looking at her with pity. They were looking at her with a new, calculating respect. What did she know? What was her angle? In a quiet, shadowed alcove, a man no one seemed to notice watched the scene unfold. He was older, with silver hair and eyes that had seen far too much. He sipped his drink slowly and with a silver pen made a small, precise notation in a little black leather-bound book. He was an observer, a ghost at the feast, and his attention was fixed entirely on the drama's central players. Then they arrived. Julian Croft and Serafina Dubois made their entrance not with a hush, but with a brash wave of noise and camera flashes from the press they'd clearly tipped off. He was the king, and he expected his arrival to be heralded. He wore his arrogance like a crown, a severe tuxedo doing little to soften the cruel line of his mouth. Serafina was on his arm, a siren in a skin-tight white gown that left little to the imagination. She was all fiery red hair and provocative smiles, soaking up the attention, reveling in her status as the woman who had toppled the Sterling dynasty. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Julian's eyes scanned the crowd, and when they landed on Isabella, they narrowed. The casual arrogance in his posture tightened. His gaze flickered from her face to the hand Damien rested protectively on the small of her back, and finally to her stomach. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Like magnets of opposing poles, they were drawn together. The crowd parted, a silent circle forming around them, everyone pretending not to watch, but missing nothing. Julian and Serafina stopped before them. The air crackled with tension. "Isabella," Julian said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. I must admit I'm surprised to see you out. I thought you'd prefer a quieter recovery. The insult was clear, a reference to the mental instability his lawyers were so keen on proving. Hello, Julian, Isabella replied, her voice cool and steady. It was a victory in itself not to tremble. The air was getting rather stale. I needed a change of scenery. Serafina's perfectly painted lips curled into a condescending smirk. Such a shame, darling, she purred, leaning into Julian's side, that you couldn't maintain your husband's interest. If you had, perhaps you wouldn't need to be here, playing arm candy for his rival. A flush of hot anger shot through Isabella. But before she could respond, she remembered Eleanor's words. Anger as a fire. She channeled it, not into a scream, but into a laser. That's an interesting perspective, Serafina, Isabella said, her tone light, almost conversational. Speaking of maintaining interest, I was just admiring your new collection, the one you launched after the spectacular failure of your Etheria line last spring. It was so fortunate that an anonymous investor from a shell company registered in the Caymans swept in to cover the losses. Croft Holdings is so very generous with its private investments, isn't it? The effect was devastating. Serafina's smile froze and shattered. The color drained from her face. She knew. Isabella knew. Julian's eyes turned to ice. He had drastically underestimated the woman standing before him. He thought he'd broken her, but he'd only forged her into something sharper, something harder. You have no idea what you're talking about, Julian taking a step forward. On the contrary, Damien interjected, his voice a silken threat. I believe she knows exactly what she's talking about. That's the thing about secrets, Croft. They have a tendency of finding their way into the light. Julian looked ready to explode, but he was trapped by 100 pairs of eyes and a dozen camera lenses. Before he could formulate a response, a quiet, unassuming man in a plain gray suit broke through the circle. He moved with a bureaucratic purpose that seemed utterly out of place amidst the glamour. He approached Serafina, ignoring Julian completely. Miss Serafina Dubois? He asked politely. Serafina stared at him, mute with shock. The man extended a long white envelope. You've been served. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. The man didn't wait for a reply. He simply placed the envelope in her trembling hand and melted back into the crowd. A subpoena. Served in the middle of the most high-profile event of the year. It was a public execution, a scandal of epic proportions. Serafina ripped it open, her eyes scanning the legal text. A flicker of raw panic crossed her features. She looked at Julian, her expression a silent plea for help. But his face was a mask of thunderous fury. His control was gone. He had lost the narrative, lost the room, and he knew it. Grabbing her arm, he dragged her away from the center of the ballroom, away from the burning stares and the frantic whispers, his power move having spectacularly backfired. You all right? Damien asked softly, his hand a steady presence on her back. Isabella realized she was holding her breath. She exhaled slowly, a shaky laugh escaping her lips. I think so. Come, he said, guiding her away from the epicenter of the explosion he had engineered. You need some fresh air. They stepped out onto a secluded marble balcony, the cacophony of the gala muffled behind heavy glass doors. The cool night air was a balm. Below them, the lights of Ethelberg City stretched out like a carpet of fallen stars. Isabella gripped the cold stone balustrade, grounding herself. She had done it. She had faced them both and had not only survived, but had won. That was only the appetizer, Damien said, standing beside her. He looked out at the city, his expression unreadable. The appetizer? Isabella asked, confused. What was that, then? A public humiliation, he said simply. A distraction. It shows them we can strike. It makes Serafina a liability and Julian look like a fool who can't control his own affairs. The scandal will dominate the news cycle for days. He then turned to her, and his eyes were serious. But the main course, that is for a more private audience. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo and pulled out a single, pristine white file folder. It was unmarked, except for the familiar, hated logo of Croft Holdings embossed in the corner. He held it out to her. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., Croft Holdings has an emergency board meeting to deal with the fallout from tonight, he said. This folder contains the evidence of the fraudulent transfer, the The sworn affidavit from the head of Atelier Moreau, and a detailed breakdown of how Julian used corporate funds as his personal piggy bank to fund his mistress's brand. It's everything they need to invoke the morality clause in his contract. Isabella stared at the folder, her heart pounding. This was it. The weapon, the key to his destruction. She took it from him, the crisp paper cool against her skin. The board is comprised of sharks, Isabella, Damien said, his voice low. They smell blood in the water tonight. Tomorrow, you will show them where the body is. He looked at her, his expression a complex mix of admiration and strategic calculation. He had brought her to the edge. Now he was asking her to jump. Your move, Miss Sterling. The morning after the gala, the air in the Croft Holdings boardroom was thick with fear and expensive cologne. It was a room built for gods, a glass-walled cage on the 80th floor overlooking Ethelberg City, with a single, colossal mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. Around it sat the board of directors, a collection of stony-faced men and women who were the true titans of the city, the ones who pulled the strings Julian Croft merely danced on. Last night's scandal at the Eclipse Gala had sent shockwaves through their world, and they were here for blood. Julian stood at the head of the table, a picture of defiant arrogance. He had weathered storms before. He had crushed rivals, silenced dissent, and bent markets to his will. This was just another brushfire, a messy bit of public relations that could be managed with enough money and intimidation. He started to speak, his voice the familiar, confident baritone that had charmed billions from investors. I understand your concerns, he began, ready to spin, to soothe, to command. The events of last night were unfortunate, a private matter magnified by a jealous rival. He never got to finish the sentence. The boardroom doors opened with a soft, almost soundless push. Every head turned, and Isabella Sterling walked in. She wasn't dressed in a power suit. She wore a simple, elegant ivory dress that did nothing to hide her pregnancy. She carried no briefcase, only the pristine white folder Damien had given her. She wasn't flanked by lawyers. She was alone. But she walked with a quiet, unshakable purpose that silenced the room more effectively than a gunshot. The king was holding court, and a ghost from his past had just walked through the wall. Julian stared, his face a mask of disbelief that quickly curdled into rage. What is the meaning of this? Security. She's here at my invitation, said a gravelly voice from the far end of the table. It was Marcus Thorne, the board's oldest and most respected member. No, not Marcus. His name was Arthur Kensington, a man whose quiet demeanor hid a will of iron. She represents a newly formed voting bloc of minor shareholders, organized by Mr. Thorne. They have granted her their proxy. She has a right to be here. Damien's move. It was brilliant. She wasn't here as a wife. She was here as a shareholder, as an owner. Isabella walked the length of the table, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. She didn't look at Julian. Her eyes were fixed on the board members, one by one. She reached the head of the table, and with a calm, deliberate motion, placed the white folder directly in front of Arthur Kensington. The thud of the paper on the wood was the only sound. Good morning, gentlemen, she said, her voice clear and steady. My husband was just about to address the unfortunate events of last night. I believe this will provide some necessary context. Kensington opened the folder. The other board members leaned in, their composure breaking as they craned their necks to see. Isabella watched as Kensington's eyes scanned the first page, a detailed summary of fraudulent transfers. She saw his jaw tighten. He passed the page to the director next to him, and a wave of shock and fury began to ripple around the table. Page after page was passed, a silent distribution of evidence. Bank statements, sworn affidavits, the canceled contracts, the entire sordid financial trail of how Julian Croft had siphoned millions from their company to fund his mistress's failing brand and cover her debts. It was all there, in black and white. Irrefutable. The room erupted. The controlled quiet shattered into a cacophony of angry, overlapping accusations. Julian tried to protest, to deny, to bluster, but his voice was lost in the storm. His power in this room had been absolute, built on a foundation of untouchable success. But now, with his financial recklessness and moral bankruptcy laid bare, that foundation had turned to sand. As the chaos reached its peak, another set of doors at the side of the room opened. Two men in dark, Conservative suits entered, accompanied by the mysterious older man from the gala, the one with the little black book. Kensington stood up, his face grim. "Julian, this is Mr. Albright from the Securities and Exchange Commission. It appears Mr. Thorne's network was kind enough to forward him a copy of this evidence as well. He is here to inform you that Croft Holdings is now under formal investigation." The downfall was swift and brutal. The man from the SEC, Albright, was the ghost from the feast, and he had come to collect. Julian was stripped of his authority on the spot. He was asked to hand over his keys, his security pass, his company phone. The board, those sharks who had smelled blood, moved to protect themselves and the company. In a unanimous vote, Julian Croft was suspended as CEO, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the investigation. He was escorted from the room he had commanded for over a decade, not as a king but as a pariah. A failure. As he passed Isabella, their eyes met one last time. His were filled with a venomous, impotent rage. Hers were filled with nothing at all. She felt a strange, hollow emptiness where the pain used to be. The war was over. Had she won? In the days that followed, the empire crumbled. The news of the SEC investigation and Julian's ousting as CEO caused the stock to plummet. The hostile takeover that Damien had been preparing for years was initiated. It was a slaughter. He bought up controlling shares at a fraction of their worth, partners fled, and the mighty name of Croft became synonymous with scandal and collapse. Serafina Dubois vanished. One day her brand was the talk of the town. The next, her stores were shuttered, her name a footnote in a cautionary tale about flying too close to the sun. The tabloids that had built her up moved on to their next victim without a backward glance. A week after the board meeting, Julian appeared at the door of the modest, secure apartment Chloe had arranged for Isabella. He looked diminished. The bespoke suit was still perfect, but it hung on a man who had shrunk. The dark circles under his eyes told of sleepless nights. The confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate, haunted look. This was their final confrontation. "They're taking it all, Izzy," he said, his voice strained. "He didn't try to come in. Everything. Thorne is gutting the company, our legacy." Isabella simply looked at him from the doorway, a hand resting on her belly. She felt no fear, no anger, just a profound, weary sadness for the man he had become and for the man she once thought he was. "There is no our legacy, Julian," she said quietly. "Don't say that," he snapped, a flash of the old arrogance returning. "Think of our child, his future, his birthright. It's all tied to the company. You have to help me. Make a statement. Say the board overreacted. Say this is all a misunderstanding orchestrated by Thorne." He wasn't apologizing. He was trying to recruit her for one last public relations campaign. The audacity of it was staggering. She almost laughed. All this time, and he still didn't get it. He still thought everything, even her, could be bought, managed, and spun. "My son's legacy will not be a tarnished company built on lies, Julian," she said, her voice as calm and clear as a winter morning. "His legacy will be the knowledge that his mother stood up for herself. It will be strength, integrity, compassion, things your money can't buy and your power can't command." She looked at him one last time, at the broken man who had broken her, and felt a final, quiet release. He was no longer a monster to be feared. He was just a man who had lost his way. "Goodbye, Julian." She closed the door, the soft click of the lock echoing the finality of the one at the penthouse. But this time, it wasn't the sound of a world ending. It was the sound of a new one beginning. Weeks later, the city was in the grip of a summer heat wave, but in the cool, sterile peace of a private hospital room, a new life had begun. Isabella held her son, her beautiful, healthy baby boy, Leo. She looked at his tiny, perfect face, his little hands curled around her finger, and felt a love so fierce and overwhelming it eclipsed everything else. The betrayal, the scandal, the downfall, it all faded into meaningless noise in the face of this small, warm, breathing miracle. This was real. This was what mattered. Her phone, resting on the bedside table, buzzed with a news alert. She glanced at it, her heart still full. The headline was stark, a brutal epitaph for her old life. "Croft Holdings in freefall. Damien Thorne completes hostile takeover." The empire was officially dead. At that exact moment, there was a soft, tentative knock on her hospital room door. It swung open, and Damien Thorne stood there. He wasn't wearing his usual armor of a bespoke suit. He was dressed in a simple cashmere sweater, and he looked different, softer. In his hand, he held not a business proposal or a legal document, but a single perfect white rose. The single white rose Damien Thorne brought to the hospital was not a declaration of love. It was a treaty. It was the symbol of a new beginning, signed in the quiet aftermath of a war, marking the moment one empire fell, and two survivors began to build something new from the rubble. 1 year later. The name on the frosted glass door of the penthouse boardroom was not Croft, but Thorne Sterling. The room was bathed in the soft morning light that streamed in through floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the sprawling green of Ethelbert Park. The faces around the polished oak table were not the cold, calculating sharks of Julian's era, but a new board of philanthropists, activists, and community leaders. At the head of the table stood Isabella Sterling. She was no longer the timid wife or the vengeful victim. The woman who addressed the board of the Thorne Sterling Foundation was poised, her voice resonating with a quiet strength that was more powerful than any of Julian's blustering commands. She was not a consultant here. She was the co-founder and the heart of the entire operation. Our mission, she said, her gaze sweeping across the room, is to provide a lifeline to women and children who find themselves in untenable situations. We offer legal aid to those silenced by powerful abusers. We fund shelters for those who have nowhere else to turn, and we provide grants to help them rebuild their lives with dignity and independence. She paused, a flicker of her own history in her eyes. We are here to ensure that no one has to stand on a cold pavement, locked out of their own life, feeling like the world has ended. We are here to prove that it hasn't. It is simply a new beginning. The empire of Julian Croft was a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. After the hostile takeover, Thorne Industries had absorbed its valuable assets and sold off the toxic ones for parts. The Croft name, once a symbol of untouchable power, was now irrevocably stained by scandal. Julian himself was a man besieged, fighting a losing battle against a mountain of lawsuits and federal investigations, his fortune dwindling, his allies gone. A king without a kingdom, left with nothing but the bitter legacy of his own cruelty. And Serafina Dubois? She had vanished like smoke. When the money disappeared, so did she, leaving behind a trail of debt and failed fashion lines, a footnote in the story of a man she helped destroy. Isabella rarely thought of them anymore. Her life was full. Full of board meetings and strategy sessions for the foundation, yes, but also full of a quiet, profound contentment she had never known. The generous divorce settlement, which Eleanor Vance had secured with ruthless precision, had become the seed money for her new purpose, a form of redemption for wealth that had been born of pain. Her partnership with Damien was the subject of endless speculation in the city's gossip columns. Were they lovers? A new power couple in the making? They were wrong. Theirs was an alliance forged in the crucible of a shared enemy, a bond of mutual respect that was deeper and more resilient than romance. He was a cunning, often ruthless businessman, but he had shown her a loyalty she'd never received from the man she had married. He had given her the tools for her revenge, but more importantly, he had given her the space to find her own strength. He was her ally, her confidant, and sometimes her friend. And that was more than enough. Later that afternoon, the sun was warm on Isabella's face as she pushed a swing in the park across from her new townhouse, a home filled with light and laughter, not cold marble and ghosts. Leo, her son, now a year old, squealed with delight, his little legs kicking in the air, his laughter the purest sound she had ever heard. She watched him, her heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. This was her empire now. Not of glass towers and stock portfolios, but of scraped knees, sticky fingers, and the unconditional love of her child. This was her legacy. As she lifted Leo from the swing, she felt a familiar sense of being watched. She glanced up and saw him, standing near the edge of the park, partially shaded by an old oak tree. Damien Thorne. He wasn't in a suit, but in casual clothes, looking for all the world like any other person enjoying the day. But he wasn't looking at the day. He was looking at them. He wasn't there to intrude, she knew. He was simply checking in, a silent guardian watching from a distance. Their eyes met across the expanse of green grass. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, and he gave her a slight, respectful nod. It was a gesture that said everything. You did it. You're safe. You're strong. Isabella smiled back, a true, peaceful smile, and clutched Leo a little closer. Damien held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the flow of the city, leaving her to her life. She turned her face back to the sun, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. The war was over. The battles were won. And in the quiet peace of this ordinary afternoon, Isabella Sterling finally understood. Her greatest victory wasn't watching Julian's downfall. It wasn't the reclamation of her name or the building of her foundation. Her true lasting triumph was this simple, beautiful moment. The quiet rebirth of a life that was entirely and finally her own. So here we are, at the end of Isabella Sterling's story. If you're still with us right now, that means something in her journey probably reached into your chest and tapped on your heart a little. Maybe it was the betrayal, the resilience, or that quiet, triumphant smile she gave at the end. Whatever it was, it meant something. And what do we take from all this? That power, wealth, and revenge might make for gripping drama, but what truly matters is the strength to rebuild, to start again, to protect what's real. There's a quote from the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius that fits here perfectly. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Julian Croft's betrayal wasn't the end for Isabella. It was the very thing that set her transformation in motion. Her pain didn't destroy her. It refined her. Like obsidian forged under pressure, she became something sharp, beautiful, and unbreakable. The greatest victory isn't when others fall. It's when you rise. This story reminds us that no matter how public your pain, how cruel the betrayal, or how impossible the odds, you can choose to respond not with collapse, but with clarity. Not with vengeance alone, but with purpose. If you've ever felt locked out of your own life, like the world ended and left you standing in the cold, let Isabella's story whisper this to you. It's not over. It's a new beginning. So my wonderful friends, if this touched something in you, if you found a sliver of truth or strength in Isabella's journey, please give this video a like, share it with someone who might need it, and consider subscribing. This channel is here to tell stories that heal, that empower, that remind you, you are not alone. And now, as we turn the last page, let me ask, what would your own new beginning look like? Let's talk about it below.